Geshe-la.
Hello.
Hey, Geshe-la, is there still the need to make an appointment to come over for classes? Are the classes open now?
Yeah, it's open. It's open. Yeah, no need
Okay.
to make an appointment.
Okay, cool. Thank you. I'll come over on Fridays.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
To the teacher, the blessed one, the four destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and humans, to you the completely and fully awakened one, the blessed one, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the subject land, I prostrate, make offerings and look for refuge. To the teacher, the blessed one, the one I am, the four destroyer, completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and humans, to you the completely and fully awakened one, the blessed one, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the subject land, I prostrate, make offerings and go for refuge. To the teacher, the blessed one, the one I am, the four destroyer, completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and good conduct, Surata, knower of the world, supreme guide of beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and humans, to you the completely and fully awakened one, the blessed one, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings and go for refuge. When, O supreme among humans, you were born on this earth, you paced out 7 strides and said, I am supreme in this world. To you who were wise then, I prostrate. With the pure bodies formed supremely pure, wisdom motion like golden mountain, fame that blazes in the 3 worlds, you know the best, to you I prostrate. With the supreme science face like a spotless moon, color like gold, to you I prostrate. You are immaculate, the 3 worlds are not. Incomparably wise one, to you I prostrate. Savior having great compassion, the teacher having all understanding, the field of merit with qualities like a vast ocean. To you, the one gone to thusness, I prostrate. The purity which makes one free from attachment, the virtue which frees one from the lower realms, the one path, the sublime pure reality, to that Dharma which pacifies thy prostrate. Those who are liberated and also show the path to liberation, the holy field qualified with realizations, who are devoted to the moral precepts, to you the sublime community intending virtue I prostrate. Do not commit any non-virtuous actions, perform only perfect virtuous actions, subdue your mind thoroughly. This is the teaching of the Buddha. A star, a mirage, a flame of a lamp, an illusion, a drop of dew or bubble, a dream, a flash of lightning, a cloud. See conditioned things as such. Through these merits may sentient beings attain the rank of all seeing, subdue the flow of faults, and be delivered from emotional suffering of aging, sickness, and death.
Sanje Chono Soje Chono No Chanchu Bodo Dane Jansuji Nagin Soje Sonam Je Rona Benje Sanje Rubuji Sanje Chono Soje Chono No Chanchu Bodo Dane Jansuji Nagin Soje Sonam Je Rona Benje Sanje Rubuji Sanje Chono Soje Chono No Chanchu Bodo Dane Jansuji Nagin Soje Sonam Je Rona Benje Sanje Rubuji.
And go for refuge in telling the mind to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. Do the merit I created by practicing giving in the other professions. May I quickly attain the state of Buddha for the benefit of all sentient beings. I go for refuge in telling the mind to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. Through the merit I created by practicing giving in the other professions, may I quickly attain the state of Buddha for the benefit of all sentient beings. I go for refuge in telling the mind to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. Through the merit I created by practicing giving in the other perfections, may I quickly attain the state of Buddha for the benefit of all sentient beings.
Tamje Jambala Chazalon de Sanje Jumde and then the Shinjava Dajumba Yanda Bonzo Sanje Ribu Chazon de Mande Vareshavan Jidenjama Jubon de Kamun Jubana Hada Mela Jedamba Sanje Jumden de So, the Shinjava Sonam Jutum. Gevezawa Namachu Mesava Severa Sonam Jeteranam Jishi, Pages and Jetem. Senam Jemedo Jeva Chuyurema, Tona Medema, Tebe Nobraga. Sherava Sidi Medema, Tona Zeba, Simjatam Jetemba, Chanjusaban Jayap, Pabe Kazana Jevo, Yangana Deva Tronjelo, Jetebe, Ishipado Memo, Poba Samjim Nejeva, so Nambrata, Yanyama, Kujata, Chomichi. Kutumba Devata Soda Benyama, Sumevata Madrid. Sumevata the Madrid, but Dumana number two, Pumbota number two, come on them with the vacation of the one Shilwich. Yozo Dovata the number two, Siva the Trevor Chuo, like Yishi Yozo, Devata Machumba. Tadajuma Sanje Jumden, Yishima, Neba, Yangana Devana, Yanda, Yatama. Simjatam Jelo Siva Sala Shuba, the down the Sanje Jumden, which way you the Yanda. Vision of Tomage, Paduk, Tamaki, Kerasa, Sindros, and Major, Yozo Chawa Yanda, Dembe, Tushabam, Yawata, Teton, the Tayo, Kevano, Soso, Rajabachu, Jumden, the Vasu, Children, the Rotu, and Yavachu, and always Chanju. Medeva Major Devata, the Matema Yovachu, Tavachu, the Yavashu, Ribachu, Timbashu, Temaja, Yozuba, Charge of Yozuba, Sonam Jibeji, Yazo Joachim, Jibena Zojuba, Kuno, Jibena Zojuba, Chimbo, Kangia to a zen, Yerazon, the Tawataja, Tabation, the Tens of Kodam, the Machas. So today I'm going to read, because the Lama Tsongkapha commentary, this quite a number of pages, trying to comment on the, the argument between Buddha Palitas and the Baba Vivek. So this is really a complicated one. So before I read the Lama Tsongkapha's commentary, maybe I'll just go touch upon the how this argument begins. So the Buddha Palitas Alpa Nagarjuna's Buddha Palita. Yeah. Buddha Palita commentary. So in his brief statement, has become the source of argument. So the Bhava Vivek and the Chandrakirti. So in the Buddha Palitas, actually it's kind of, maybe I would say the concept of arising. The concept of arising. So something that arises, and it arises from what? If something arises. So arising from what? And what do you mean by the Buddha? And the Buddha says, no arises, no cessations, and no coming and no going. So if there's something arises, arising from what? Arising from itself, arising from other, or both, all things can arise, without cause. So the in the commentary, the Buddha Palita, so in his writing, it says, in this regard, if something were to arise, that thing would be arises from itself or from another, or from both itself and another, or without a cause. But if we examine these alternatives, none are tenable. Why? The term from itself ultimately means from its own self. Now, first, a thing does not arise from its own self, because such arising would be pointless. Moreover, such arising would be endless. So the question here is, if things really arises, things really being born from its own nature, by itself. So then, the first in the consequence is throwing in consequences, arising would be pointless. And arising would be endless. It should be born endlessly, or there is no point of arising. So if something that is kind of always been existing, right? If something that exists by itself, and then there is no point to say, oh, this arises from that. Says barley sprout arises from the barley seed, a rice sprout arises from the rice seed, or this can be arises in a hot area. This could be arising in a cold area. So there is, if things really exist by itself, it shouldn't be relying on the weather. It shouldn't be relying on the seed. It shouldn't be relying on any soil or fertilizers. Things are really exist by themselves. So the arising from there and here in this area, that area, is become pointless. So, and then if things arises, and if still things really arises by itself, from its own self, and then it should be, once it should be born, and it should be born endlessly. So now here the Buddha Palitas directly directly trying to convince the Samkhya school, saying if things arises by itself, the arising from hot weather, hot area, cold area, this kind of soil, and soil which has some soil there is, we call in India, the Banjar Jameen, so which means it's a lot of concretes and many stones, and there this is not place for things to grow. So the point is to talk about these things, right? Things really arises by itself, and still it exists or it arises, without relying on the seed and the area, seed and the weathers, and then the soil, and then it should be born forever, endlessly born, right? Because there is no any condition that can restrain or condition that can cause obstacles to be born. But if something that already exists, so as such things exist in and of themselves, do not need to arise again. So Samkhya school, so one of the first non-Buddhist, philosophical point of view, the Samkhya. So Samkhya thinks that things do exist by its own nature, and like for example, a barley sprout before it being arisen, it is already exists within the seed. Right. So before, which means that every effect or this every result must pre-exist in their own causes. So the barley seed has the barley sprout, and the tomato seed has tomato. But this tomato is still in mundanely. So tomato that exists in the seed is not being mundanely speak of arisen, because it hasn't been obvious to the eye consciousness, right? So, and there's again reappearing or re-arising, so reborn by depending upon the corporate conditions. So it's things that already exist there, pre-exist there, but it needs some corporate condition to be physically manifest. So it's re-arising. So Samkhya school thinks re-arising. Now this two said, for now here, things means that's a subject. The predicate here is things. If things do exist by their own self or their own nature, right? Then the throwing the consequences is arising would be pointless, and if something born, it should be born endlessly. So the subject, predicate, and the reasoning. The subject is the thing. So we are analyzing on the things, how things arises. So the predicate here is subject is the thing, and the predicate is the things do not arise by itself. So things do not arise by itself, and then the reason is if things do exist by its own nature, and arising would be pointless, and it should be born endlessly. So this kind of line, when the Baba Vivek reads, Baba says, or you are using the reason here is things, the reason here is in the consequences, things would be arising, would be pointless and born endlessly. So which imply from the reasoning that you are also accepting, right? The arising is not pointless. There is arising, and there is, limit of arising, right? Limit arising will be limited, and arising, and things do arises, right? So this reason, to negate arising by itself, the predicate, right? Arising by itself. And first you should accept things arises with limit and things arising with meaning. And also when you explain so another line you says, such things exist in and of themselves, do not need to arise again. So you're using another reasoning says, so if things do exist by its own nature, and so there would be the consequences, there would be no such things arises again. So that reason implying that you are accepting things do arises again. So the Baba Vivek says, Buddha Palita, you are accepting things arises with limit, with meaning, and things do arises again. So Baba Vivek, the argument is, how can you say things arises again? First it arises and it disintegrates. Once it disintegrates, completely disintegrate, it ceases to exist. Once it ceases to exist, how can it reappear? What died cannot be reappear again. What ceased to exist cannot be re-exist. So Baba Vivek says your logic is invalid. Right? This logic, reasoning, with this reasoning, you cannot negate self, things arises by itself. So this is the Prasangika school, unique way of presenting the unique. I think there's a Prasangika school unique, way of convincing or the inferring, yeah. So which Prasangika school says the main point, the logic, the main point is to to make someone who's convinced. So through showing the contradiction of their own, what they already accepted. So if you show the contradictions, what they already accepted, and they will be convinced. Right? So my reason here is things do not arise by themselves. And then the reason is if things do exist by themselves, and things should not be reborn again or re-arises again, right? Re-arises or born again. So the reason, reason is accepted by opponents. Not necessarily you have to accept the reasoning. You're trying to convince others. You're not trying to, it's not this reason is consequentialist reasoning. The consequential reasoning, reason not necessarily accepted by the, what do you call it, your own, you don't have to accept the reason. Because you're using the reasoning, you're saying other already accepted, therefore you use what they think, right? Yeah, maybe another way of saying, like for example, in Sanjay school, the Sanjay school thinks that the sound is, sound is being produced. Sound has to produce. But at the same time, the nature of the sound disappears, remain in the space. So that the very nature of the sound is the permanent. Right? So when they say the sound is the permanent, the nature of the sound is permanent, and anything that is permanent is not being born or not being caused by any causative conditions, because the permanent nature means it's not depending or relying on causative conditions. Permanent means it cannot be changed, right? So if something depending on causative condition, that is not the permanent, that is changing. So we use the consequentialist reasoning, said sound must not be product because it is the permanent. So when you use it is the permanent, it's not saying that you are accepting the permanent, because others accept it, right? Because you accept the permanent, therefore now you should, in the consequences, you should accept the sound is not product. So the direct contradictions, so showing the direct contradictions of what they have already accepted. So that is the kind of, Prasangika school. So the Prasangika school called consequentialist school. So most of their reasoning is like that. Right? And the syllogistic reasoning is straightforward. It's kind of, there's no indirect. Like a sound is impermanent because it's a product. Anything that's a product must be impermanent, like a house, leaves, flowers, right? Anything that is a product being produced from causative condition must be impermanent, like it's in the house, cars, leaves, and feathers, like that. So therefore, sound is the product, therefore it must be impermanent. That's kind of very straight, syllogistic reasoning. The consequentialist school is the opposite. So every reason is not acceptable for the individual. So reasoning has accepted others, opponents accepting it. So what they accept the reason by using that, and using that, and they find it's contradict what they accepted. Yeah, this is the kind of this is a very big argument. The consequentialist schools.
It seems like there's a kind of a linguistic issue here, that you can't argue arising exists without dissolution. If you say things arise, you have to also claim they dissolve, don't you? I mean, if they arise from something, on the other hand, there must be something that dissolves. The argument basically contradicting dependent origination. They're basically saying, I mean, they're trying to have it both ways. There's a cause for arising, but also there's not a cause because there's there's no dissolution. There's nothing that can change the course of arising. They're saying things arise, but also they don't arise. There's no dissolution. If they arise from themselves, there's no dissolution. Do you understand what I'm trying to say here?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's relational again, like left and right, black and white. Arising has to have, on the other things arise. They arise from something, and that means there's also something that dissolves. Doesn't arising also imply dissolution? Dissolution?
Mm-hmm.
Can you have arising without dissolution? Yeah, that's the question. Can you have arising without dissolution?
Without dissolutions. So I think dissolutions, and so I think every arising is without dissolutions. So without disintegrating, nothing arises. So arises, the very meaning of the arising is opposite of the dissolving. It's not dissolving, it's happening. Right? Now the nature of what has happened, what is going to happen, must be disintegrating and finally it dissolves. So the very arising is totally opposite of the dissolving. It's going to happen. Right? So I think this, what you said, is another way of arguing on how things do not arise by itself. Now here, the Buddha Palita and the Baba Vivek, the arguing is saying, yes, this is all right. The Baba Vivek don't accept things arises by itself. And Buddha Palita also kind of disagree on things arising by itself. Now their arguing is the reason they use to negate, to refute arising from itself. So Baba Vivek saying, oh, you should be used like, for example, things do not arise by itself because things are dependent arising. So that looks very kind of, looks very easy, there's no kind of argument. So things do not arise by themselves because things arising dependently. So it's kind of, it's clean. So instead of using that, the Buddha Palitas is, saying things do not arise by itself. If things do arise by themselves, and it should be, it would be pointless for arising. It would born endlessly. So then there's kind of, so what do you mean by that? So are you saying things do arises, right, with limit, and things do arises again? So the Buddha Bali says, I'm not accepting it, but I'm using this reasoning because the opponent already accepting this reasoning. So we can say, yeah, for example, if the self or Atma is pre-exists, kind of, from endlessly and would be existing endlessly. And you can also say, is your Atma exists before, kind of prior to your grandfather, right? It should be. Your Atma, yourself, must exist, before your grandfather and grandfathers. Because this self that you accept as yourself is permanent. It exists, from the beginning to the endlessly. So that's kind of, is directly showing the contradiction to the opponent. It's not saying, oh, I also do exist. Myself exists before my grandfather. So like that, yeah. And for example, if someone who believes the self or atmas, their I is, forever existing. And then we can tell them, yourself must exist, right? Must not be exist permanently. If yourself existing permanently, yourself should exist before grandfather. So if you're not accepting it, yourself is not existing, your grandfather, right? If you don't accept, then I'm succeed in showing the contradictions. Now you should claiming yourself is permanent. So, the implication of that is not necessarily accepted. Accepted in your own standpoint. So the argument is like that. So Bhava Vivek and Buddha Palita, they don't, not because of none of those agreeing on things do exist by themselves. So nothing existing in and of itself, nothing arises, nothing arises by itself. So now the argument, they are kind of arguing and disputing on what reason you use to refute that the attributes. So the Baba Vivek says, I'm going to use, like, say, things do not arise by itself if, because thing arises by depending on cause and condition. That looks very clean. Right? There is no kind of, there is no need additional effort to explain things. So the Buddha Palita way of saying is, so my main point for argument is kind of, laying out the logic reasoning is for convincing others, not convincing myself. Right? So in this way, Prasangika school also negating, refuting, arising again. So arises again. Because arising again is pointless because, right, things arisen and disintegrate cease to exist. The things that is already ceased to exist, there's no way it arises again. Right. So 2023 March 10, right? Now there's no possible of coming again. So, and then say, and how about 2023 March 11? So March 11 of 2023 is a continuity of the March 10 of the 2023. But it is not the March 10. March 10 has already ceased to exist. So there is no re-arise again of the March 10 that is already ceased to exist. So so in this way, they can, in the Prasangika schools, their understanding of the time is totally different from the essentialist school. So and also in this the non-Buddhist school, many of those, so they kind of sometimes this is the five elements, and then the sound are the permanent. And what else are permanent? This is right, wrong is permanent. it's always there. And then this is, space is permanent, and Atma is permanent. The self, I, is permanent. And then the sometimes they call, I don't know, in Tibetan we used sok. Many times in English, the translator, they use life. So sometimes they also says that life is also permanent. So, and then also the things that, so then making what are they are differentiating that, body, the physical body and the life is like an apple and orange. It's two different things. Like a fuel and the fires, and kind of differentiated and separately, and then composite and components, and then self and others. So they think this is, independent, separate. So the right, wrong, right, and then the fire and the fuel, and the body and the life, and then the cause and the effect, component and composite. So these are, ultimately they are separate. By nature, there are two different things. There's a composite and the components, like a forest and its trees, right? And mala and its beats, nation and then individuals, right? Nationality, nation and individuals. So they think this is the, two different kind of ultimately separate entity. So if yourself, your I, yourself is permanent, then you should be existing. You should be born before your grandfathers, and it will be correct. If you think that yourself is not existing or not born before the grandfather, and you cannot be permanent. Right? So in this way, if things do arises, endlessly, if things arises again, and then you can say, yes, things arise by itself. Because it again means, for example, the person who is by independently, right? He's going inside the house, and he independent. What comes in the house can go out independently, right? So in this way, if you are existing, yourself and the house are independent, but you can go in the house, you can come out from the house. It's not house won't say, oh, please don't go out, or house will say, please come in. No, so it's not independent, but you can go in and out. In this way, every effect is in the seat and out the seat, independently. So things arising independently, so that means by itself is born. To be born, to be arisen is not relying on the seed and their corporate conditions. So which apply to the self, and then I think this is very much connected to the concept of the liberations, concept of the Bhagavan, the idea of the Bhagavans, idea of Bhagavan, idea of yourself. Because if
the sprout by itself existing independently, existing within the seed and coming out independently. So similarly, you are existing independently with this body. You can leave this body, you can get another body independently. So you are always independent, self-existing, not relying on your mothers, not relying on your fathers, not relying on your, anything. You can just independently say, oh, today I'm going to be Tibetan, or tomorrow I'm going to be African, yes, then I go to. So if there is kind of in the self with a person like that, and he is really determining everything, right? So like people change their passport, right? Or this passport, and then I'm going to next another country's passport. So in this way, people do change their life. So, which means, yes, there is Atma, there is independent I or self. If it is impossible, right? So yourself as a Tibetan, it is not independently existing because it's depending on your body. Your body. So you are not independent from your body. And you as a human being, you as a strong man, you as a beautiful, and it's all not independent from the body. And you as a smart, you as an adult is not independent from your mind. You as afraid, you as brave is not independent from your feeling. If independent, right? In an instant, if you are experiencing fear, says, "Oh, I don't like this. I'm going to be now brave again." So you are always like you and your feeling is always like flower in the pot. The flower can move from this pot to the another pot. So that is called independent existing. So there is no such thing, the independent existing. There is no such thing that existing by itself. So if nothing really existing by their own essence, and how can the Bhagavan that exists independently? So Bhagavan is a functioning. Bhagavan can, by relying on the Bhagavan can bless you, guide you, protect you. So if Bhagavan is functioning, then he also is dependent on his own cosmic condition. So when we call the Buddha and Shakyamuni as a Bhagavan Shakyamuni, his kind of activities of turning wheel of the Dharma, his activities of the blessing and the protections are driven from his perfections, perfected compassion, perfection of these, compassion and the wisdom. The wisdom and the compassion perfected him as infallible protector that make him to be able to turn the wheel of the Dharma. So Buddha has the cosmic conditions. The activities of the Buddha is not independently. So becoming Buddha is not independent. So everything do exist independently or by themselves, in and of itself, and they should be existing before their cause, within their cause, after the cause, right? So they don't really need the cause and the condition to produce it. So that really kind of going towards the, nihilisms, things, without a cause. So if things can arises without a cause, and then, and then the effort to produce something, effort to make something is nonsense. It's not making sense at all. It's useless. Efforts are useless. They're successful, unsuccessful, so it's no longer relying on effort. So this is kind of, idea of arising, kind of, becoming or happening or arising. So these are, and this kind of, this happening, becoming, arising is not by itself. There is no independent entity that has the activities of happening and becoming and arising. So, for example, it says arising of the sprout. What is that entity? Is that real kind of? Is there sprout, real sprout, and then it's going to be arises? If there is a real sprout, and then it should be either past sprout or the present sprout. If there is no past sprout, there is no present sprout. There is no sprout. If there is no sprout, what is their sprout? They're doing arising. So the arising of the sprout, the very kind of, idea of arising, coming, becoming, so if you look closely, there is nothing. It's all by projecting, by looking at the potential of the cause. So within the present cause, there's a potential, and we project it. Oh, this may happen. This is going to happen, right? So kind of, the future, there is no such things, or there is no essence at all in the future. So I think this, and also, that's the kind of, things arises by itself or independent, permanent natures. And within the follower Buddhist school, kind of except the Prasangika school, most of the school, and they think there is no independent, but there is dependent. And that dependent is in the continuity. And continuity means the continuum is continuously existing from the past to the present, present to the futures. So that also idea is kind of, rejected in the Prasangika school. So when there is no single entity that continually existing from the past to the present, present to the futures, what is that continuum? That coming from the past to the present. If there's something coming from the past to the present, present to the future, and why not single entity cannot do that? So for example, this is my continuum. The continuum of the Tenzin Sherab will be existing even after the death of the Tenzin Sherab. Right? Continuum of Tenzin Sherab will continuously existing even after death of Tenzin Sherab. So that continuum is already exist before Tenzin Sherab has born. So the Prasangika school said, this is kind of the idea of that is, you are kind of, the idea of that is you think there's some kind of intrinsic intrinsic quality in the continuum. There is no intrinsic quality in the continuity, continuity. So it just, continuity is conceptually constructed phenomena, and the basis for that is continuity is disintegrate and arises, disintegrate and arises, past and beginning, past and arising. Right? The cause disintegrate, effect arises. That effect ceases, another arises. So there is, so this continuum is just conceptually fabricated based on one sees, another arises, one sees, another arises. So in the reality, there is no even continuum that existing from the past to the present, present to the future. I think, which means I think, like Sotatika school, Babashika school, Mainula school, they think when they talk about the continuum, so they think, the self of the person, like a man, a woman, right? Like the dog, cat. So this self is not really, continuously existing. But when there is the continuum cannot be based with self as a male or female or animal or insects or bird, and that self should be should base with consciousness. So then there's this, what kind of consciousness? Is it the eye consciousness, the nose consciousness, and then mental consciousness? Again, we talk about what is that mental consciousness continuously existing? Is it mind that is imagining the car, right? Friends, the house, and they say no. There's sixth mental consciousness, and that sixth mental consciousness again, the subconscious level. There's a continuum to the very basic mental consciousness. So the continuum of that is remaining existence. So it's go they're trying to find the essence. Oh, this is not continuing. Oh, this is not continuing. This is not. Maybe that there is something underneath, right? The stream of consciousness. So Prasangika schools, if self is a man, woman, if these are not continuing, how can you find the self, which is not the man, not the female, right? And it's still the self. So this Buddhist, that's essentially school and non-Buddhist school, they always their biggest fear is they think if there's nothing to hold on, they may fall in denialism. So they try to find something to hang on, right? So the Prasangika school says, I have no problem of saying today is the Sunday, Sunday is a continuity of the Monday, a continuity of the Saturday, but Saturday is no longer existing, but still Sunday is continuity of Saturday. So if Sunday can continuity, Sunday can be continuum of Saturday, so I have no no problem of following nihilism, of annihilating the Saturday. If Sunday is the continuity of the Saturday, so I have no problem annihilating the Saturday. I have no fear of dissipation of the Saturday. Right? Saturday has.
If I understand you correctly, you're saying the other schools have a fear that without a underlying identity, permanent identity,
Underlying
as a
identity
basis.
is best. Yeah. Don't add permanent. Underlying identity. Yeah.
Well, if it's underlying, there is if there is an underlying identity, you're suggesting there is an Atman or Atma or something permanent, seems to me. The Prasangika seems to be saying these other schools are still holding on to ego, a very subtle kind of ego, or self, and they're kind of saying, okay, if you want to say there's continuity, we'll let you say there's continuity, although that itself is a fabrication. But the continuity has no underlying identity whatsoever. That's what I hear you say.
Yes, yes, yeah. Identity is conceptually designation. So identity, the conceptual designation means it just merely exists in the face of thought. Beyond the thought, how much you dig into the reality, there is no identity. So the identity has to create by the thought, and it exists in the face of thought. So if you try to find, the grosser level identity and that little bit underneath underlying identity, very kind of sub-level identity, so there is no identity at all beyond the concept. So the problem is, and then they will say, if there is nothing to find, nothing to identify, right, beyond the concept, so are you not falling in nihilism? Are you not denying everything? Are you denying the law and the cause and effect? Something karma that committed in the past life and repeating in this life, or even after 500 lives. So how can this be possible? The law and the cause and effect, we will dismantle the idea of the earthy the what you call indestructible relationship of cause and effect. This kind of idea is now not stable because there is nothing beyond the concept. So the Prasangika school says, simple way of saying, so when I accepted Sunday is the continuity of the Saturday, I have no fear of dissipation of Saturday. I am not going to kind of fall in nihilism of the the discontinuity of the Saturday. I'm not going to. That does not really kind of make me fear. Oh, Saturday is now discontinued, or become nothingness, or become non-existing at all. If the Saturday become non-existing, Sunday wouldn't happen, right? So
Sheila, that type of thinking is just the thinking that we create to comfort ourselves.
Yeah, it's a comfort, but it's also comfort without exaggerations. So many comfort, so we have to exaggerate, and then kind of it's temporarily. It helps you to find the comfort zone. So the comfort zone is always for the individual, and there's no comfortable at all. So now, and another thing is because the many, many philosophical point of views, religious faith. So I think they kind of, to keep them, safe. They kind of for their own safe, for their own comfort. So they have to exaggerate something. So they exaggerate something. So I think that's why, the Bhagavan, so Ishvara, which has no cosmic condition, but it exists permanently. And so because of the Bhagavan is permanent and it existing forever, right, from the beginningless to the endless, it is nature of the Bhagavan is permanent. There is no cosmic condition for the Bhagavan. There is no history of how he became the Bhagavan. And, right, so once we create that, now we say, oh, if this is really, so I have no choice. So kind of but to rely on him. And at the same time, you say, now he is also responsible for your happiness and your suffering. And you also have a fear and you have to rely on him. This is like, abuse kind of king. So without him, we cannot survive. And without fearing him, we cannot live. So we have fear and we also rely on him. So still, I don't know. This is kind of, you can interpret that as the pure love to the Bhagavan. So under his kingdom, you have to, right, and he will punish you or he will reward you. So I think that whole idea is because of you identify yourself as the, independent self. So as long as you are not being able to dismantle the independent self, and you cannot free yourself from this independent Bhagavan. So the self-produced or self-produced or things existing in and of itself is here the kind of the negation element, the main point, the negation element. So we have to negate that. So as I mentioned earlier, if the self, yourself is existing permanently, then you should also kind of agree on your existing before your grandfather. So if not, and you are not permanent, so there is the time you are not exist. There's the time you exist, and there will be a time you are not going to exist. Right. So that then, if this is kind of the this and so this within this change, disintegrations, and how can you be permanent? How can you be independent? Right. Every feeling is a dependent cosmic condition. Every thought, every mind, perceptions is a dependent on the cosmic condition. What is independent entity with your feeling, with your body, with your perceptions? There is no independent nature. There is nothing intrinsically existing. So the things that dependent arisings. So this is dependent arising of your existing, and that dependent arising also applicable for the Bhagavan. So Bhagavan is the dependent arising. Bhagavan Shakyamuni, turning wheel of the Dharma, is depending on his omniscience. His omniscience and depending on perfection of the six perfections, and depending on continuously perfecting his compassion and the wisdom for life after life, countless, the 3 years to practice. Right? So sometimes we say the Bhagavan and the Shakyamuni, we call Luwa means infallible, right? Infallible protectors. The way he protects and how he becomes the protectors is infallible. There is no lie at all, right? Because he's the result, the perfect result from perfecting compassion and wisdom. So therefore he is complete and total of compassion and wisdom. So he is not the cause. So he is not the cause for your suffering. Right? He is not the cause that send you in hell drama.
This kind of seems to be a serious problem in Buddhism itself, how they talk about things. I mean, like in Tantra, they say, okay, you can be enlightened in this lifetime, no more than 16 lifetimes. And then Dalai Lama, I heard him say once, this is really unrealistic. It takes so many lifetimes to be enlightened. But as soon as you talk about things this way, you're already implying an underlined identity, right? As soon as you talk about enlightenment within any time frame, that presumes to me the existence of an underlying identity. Otherwise, you can't. If there's no underlying identity, you can't talk about it in any time frame.
I can talk about the 2023's continuously existing from January to the end of the December. But there is no underlying identity, right? So it started from January 2023. It will end the December 31st, right? So there is no 2023, the whole year that existing in January 1st, not in January 2nd, not even in the February and March. There is no identity at all. But, 2023 is began with January 1st and ended in December 31st. So I think I have said that many times, and a minute is remaining for 60 seconds. Minute is not going to remain existing with first second, with second second, third second, even 20th second. Even minute is not existing at all with the 60th second, but minute can remain for 60 seconds because minute is, conceptually measured from counting the seconds, 60 seconds. We conceptually constructed or measured as a minute. So therefore, minute should exist for 60 seconds, right? Because it is the conceptually constructed entity. So it cannot be found. It cannot be. There is no illustration of that minute in each seconds. There is no 2023 year that can be found in each days and each month, but still the 2023 existing, but depending on the 12 months.
Well, as soon as you drop the word identity, as soon as you drop the word identity, there's no one, because one means identity. There's no one to be enlightened, and there's no one suffering, because one doesn't exist on any level whatsoever. So the word enlightened becomes absurd, as well as the word suffering, except as a complete fabrication, as if an identity existed.
I think you are kind of, negating identity. So for negating identity is not the same as what kind of, not accepting identity. Negating here, we are negating the self. We are negating self. We are not, denying the existence of self. So how we negate self of the person? The person is being identical with aggregates, person being independent from the aggregates. This is the way of negating the self. This is negating self means, from now on we are not going to call anything. We are not going to name anything, right? So which means I'm not talking at all. I'm not talking about the day. I'm not talking about myself. I'm not talking about the table. Identity exists. So identity underlying identity means, very subtle identity that is already exists before you project. That kind of identity is not there. So there is no any identity that is identified by itself. There is no identity that is not projected or constructed by the thought. That means there is no underlying identity. Negating, destroying, denying are not the same. So negating identity is not denying identity. So and dhammas, no self is no anatmas, and Buddhist anatma. So it's not, they are not saying there is no me, right? So we're saying there is no me as a self or the self of the person that is different from each aggregate. There is no me as a self that is, sometimes it exists or dwells in aggregates. So I think many times it says the aggregates are many, the self is one, and do they really, these many aggregates attached to the one self, like a forest, many trees attached to the one single mountain? Or the self that sometimes goes in, stay in the aggregates, like the tigers that goes in the forest and then stays in the forest. Do I sometimes go inside my body? Or today I'm going to sit in live in my head, or tomorrow I'm going to sit in the stomach, or so today I just come out from the sun bath on my skin. So sometimes it's too cold. You just, today I'm going to my shoes with my feet. So there is no self that existing in this way. So that is, negations, refuting, rejecting, and denying. I think if you interpret it, they are same, and that is very difficult. So in this way, and then the follower of the Prasangika schools, particularly the Prasangika school, they would say There is no identity of table. There is no identity of minute. There is no identity of hour. There is no identity of month and week and year. There is no identity of myself. So Prasangika is not saying no identities. So Prasangika is saying identity has to, realize that is the conceptually designation. Identity is not there within the basis. So this is like, identity, the way it existing, like, the, mirror and the reflections. The reflections are not there, right, before the mirror, or it is not coming from somewhere else, it's not going to somewhere else, right? But the reflection exists, but it's not part of the mirror. It's not independent from the mirror, but it exists. So reflection existing because of the contact of your face and the mirror. So you're saying my reflections, the mirror image is not intrinsic, is not independent. So mirror image is not independent, not intrinsic, does not mean denying the existing of the mirror image. So underlying identity is something that is identified by itself. So that's why, Sodantika school, Babashika school, they're saying, the imputed I is me as a thin shell, me as a Tibetan, me as a monk. This is the imputed self. And the Sodantika school says there must be something underneath, there's underlying identity. So what is that underlying identity that allows you to it kind of gives you the basis for naming me, right? Some basis to name. So then they says, it's not an eye consciousness, not a knowledge consciousness, not the time consciousness, not the body. It's this kind of in the stream of the mental consciousness. That the stream of the mental consciousness not only remain in this life, it continues to remain for the next life and their next life. So they found some kind of, stream of the mind or the continuity of the mind that they think this is the illustration of a me. Without no one's naming as a me, but it is me. So which means before someone name me, but it is by itself, I am. So that's called, this is why we call the essentialist school. Sodantika school, Vabhashika school, mind-only school. So in the Prasangika school, they are kind of, refuting all of them. There is no such things that is any identity or any kind of, identity that's identified by itself or exists in and of itself. But still, we can, we can accept without any rejections the kind of law and cause and effect, life after life, and the past, present, futures. We can accept those. So by by negating or refuting the independent nature or intrinsic natures, still being able to accept the law in cause and effect, continuity, and cause the condition for the lower realm, cause the condition for the higher rebirth, and causing the condition for the liberation, causing the condition for the enlightenment. So yeah, I think in the very obvious example is, knowing the Saturday is not continuously existing in the Sunday, knowing the Sunday is not continuously coming from the Saturday, but accepting accepting or knowing Sunday is the continuity of the Saturday. So if you are convinced with that, and you have no fear of so no fear of denying the existing and continuity of the Saturday, so there is no problem of problem reject Saturday become nothing. Saturday is not going to be nothing, because when the Saturday cease to exist, Sunday happened. Sunday is the continuity of the Saturday. Although Saturday is not continually existing during the Sunday, but Sunday is Sunday being able to manifest because of the disintegration of the Saturday. So Bali sprout happened because of the disintegration of the Bali seed. So although Bali seed is not going to continuously existing, during the Bali sprout is not there during the Bali seed, but Bali sprout is happened because of the disintegration of Bali seed. So Bali seed is not going to be non-existing. So this many schools of thought, including Buddhist schools, they have a very hard time understanding this subtle dependent arising.
I had a problem when you said, I'm slightly confused. Barley seed is not, I think you said barley seed is not going to be non-existing, but barley seed doesn't exist once it dissolves. It only exists kind of adventitiously as a temporary arising. It exists as a mere appearance, but not inherently. Is that not true? So in a way we can say it doesn't exist once it dissolves.
Yeah.
And right?
Yes, yeah. I'm not going to exist as a Tenzin Sherab, right, during my next life. But, right, so, but when I die, I'm not going to be non-existing. So I'm not going to exist in my next life as a Tenzin Sherab, but me as a Tenzin Sherab, when he died, is not going to be non-existing. Because every action he has committed, he has to face the consequences of it. So you say, when you break the destroy the air ring, and you say this air ring is no longer an air ring, but I'm going to turn into what called ring. So when the air ring is the identity of the air ring is become non-existing, does not mean it's become non-existing. It can turn into ring, and again you can make it spoon, right?
I have some problem with what you just said. You said once
So
you're no longer,
I should count your problems, maybe.
you said once Tenzei Sherp is no longer existing, there are still consequences for every action. And why I'm having some difficulty with that is because as an inherent identity, Tenzin Sherp doesn't exist. So how can you attach consequences to anything that no longer exists? Yes, there's some kind of consequences, but it's very mirage-like because the identity of Tenzin Shirin no longer exists. For all I know, what we called Tenzin Shirin when that dissolved and no longer has an identity of Tenzin Shirin, it'll mix with 1,000 other beings or whatnot. How can, the minute you say there's consequences, it seems suddenly to suck in again on some subtle level identity.
Yeah, that's very good. That means you are really existing. I can inflate you, I can deflate. So you can, when it's suck, you can just come out. So I think here in Tibetan, we are saying, yeah, there's a, what do you call this vegetable? Like it's like a shaped like an onion, horseradish is red. It's a red, like shaped like a onion. It's very red.
Radish,
yeah.
Some kind of radish.
Beet.
Yeah, beet, right? I think yeah. So we usually say the beet is eatable, and fish is also eatable, but don't eat together. It's poison. So beet and fish doesn't go kind of together. So when I say there will be a time that I'm not going to be existing. So now you are interpreting that, oh, that is the time I'm become non-existing. Right. So there will be a place that you cannot find me. Oh, are you not going to exist at all? So there are many places that I'm not existing, right? So there will be, and what is that time that you are not going to exist? Or Tenzin Sherp is not going to be existing in the next life he become elephant. Right? So next time I'm in South India, the big elephant is running around. At that time, no one called me and no one identified me. Oh, Tenzin Sherp is just, he's wandering in the forest, right? So there will be a time that is my identity with Tenzin Sherp is not going to exist. That does not mean the Tenzin Sherp will be, become or non-existing. So this life is not going to be existing in the next life, but this life, when it ended, is not becoming non-existing.
I heard this very funny story years ago.
So that if that is the beet and fish together, so and it caused a lot of problems here.
I heard some very funny story many years ago from someone I knew at the time pretty well. And she was in a big line somewhere in India. A Dalai Lama had given an empowerment. And in this line in front of her were these two African guys, and they were playing musical instruments. Maybe one guy was was playing the drum, and another one was maybe playing the flute, and people were giving him dirty looks because there was a line to get blessings, and people felt, oh, it's very inappropriate. They're making all this noise. And when finally they came to Dalai Lama for the blessing, he kind of lighted up with joy and said, this is what my friend told me. She said she was there to see this in back of him. Dalai Lama said, oh, you were two of my favorite birds and my prior incarnation or something like that. So, I mean, to me, that statement suggests there is some kind of identity that you can recognize. It's like the concept tulku, carrying forward. There is again, I have a problem with this in terms of the current logic because it suggests there is something recognizable from before. And if there's no underlying identity, how can there be anything recognizable from a prior time? I don't get it.
My sister just asked me that question.
So this kind of story is good with chai, and it's kind of, this, especially it's very comfortable in a coffee shop. So, and then with small rain, so this kind of story, and then have chai, it's very comfortable.
I think maybe with marijuana, not chai.
Marijuana is even better, so you can exaggerate more.
Better story.
So I can recognize Sunday, today, is the continuity of the yesterday, but I'm not going to say today is yesterday. Recognizable. I can recognize, I can understand today is the continuity of the yesterday, but I'm not going to call, right? This is yesterday. So very simple. So, yeah. if you're really obsessed to the difficult, then you just make it difficult. So if you're trying to make it more simple, right? And then that's very simple. There is nothing really kind of difficulties. So I never heard those. Yeah, you two are my birds. Yes. So she must be very happy. See. So the whole point here is now it's kind of part of the refuting or kind of negating intrinsic nature. So intrinsic nature, so intrinsically arising, inherently arising. So there's only 4 possibility of arising if things arise intrinsically. Or first, it has to be arises by itself. Or second, it has to arise from another. It has to arise from the both. Or things arises without cause. The 4 chronologies, the post possibles. So which is, which may indicate there is some kind of intrinsic arising. So if things do not arise by themselves, and things not arising from others and not from both, not without cause, now only possible left is things arises dependently. Right? Dependent arising. And then dependent arising does not mean that all men standing by depending on a can. So they're all existing together and one's leaning towards others. So that dependent arising is not here. So dependent arising means the arising of the sprout is, itself, the arising of the sprout is the futures, a yet to be born, a yet to be exist, but it exists by depending upon present cause and condition. Because there is, within the present cause, present seed has the potential, and their corporate conditions is, ready to give rise some kind of, the sprout. So this whole present cause and conditions, indicating the arising is possible, arising is existing. So the arising from its own side, there is nothing to arise. So that arising accepted dependently is existing. Future, there is, you cannot just go into the futures, what is coming. So you have to look the future in the present, what can be possible, what can be coming, right? So in the movie, they say they're going to the future, right? And they see what is going to happen, right? And sometimes you want to change something, you go past. So there is past means things that cease to exist. If things cease to exist, where you go? How can you go into non-existing? So the future, the dependent arising means the very existing of the future is accepted to be existing by depending upon present cause and condition. So that's the one reason, say, the arising is dependent. Second, the arising, if you're arising, referring to the things that already arisen, that arisen sprout, right? Arisen sprout, right? Again, it is not intrinsically arises, because if the arisen sprout is, there is any intrinsic nature, and it has to be born from either disintegration or the cessation of the seed, or it has to be it has to arises during the seed, right? Sprout has to be born while seed is not ceased, or sprout has to born when the seed is no longer existing. There's no possible the sprout can born while seed is still there. And there's no possible of the sprout being born, born from the end, the cessation of the seed. Why? If the sprout is born and it's from the cessation of the seed, a sprout is born from no cause. So it has to born from no seed. If the sprout is born during the seed, and the cause and the effect is simultaneously. So this is why sprout is known as a arisen dependently. So dependently means the arises from is the two from means there, to see them, there's a two, sprout and the seed. And the sprout and seeds orderly existing, and one born from another is not intrinsically. Because when the sprout is born, seed is non-existent. Right? So you can bring the image of the seed, the seed that already passed, you can bring the image, and you saw, you have a witness, the sprout has born, and you are trying to make the connections. The sprout that right now in front of me and the seed that's already passed, the image that I carry. So I try to make the relation. So I'm making a relation in my thought. So there is that dependent arising is, there is no intrinsic. It's not because you have found the seed and sprout is relating. Physically, there is no relation. It's a conceptually we made the relation. So last night you sleep and morning you wake up. So I have my wake kind of, today, they say, last night I didn't have good sleep, therefore last night I had very good sleep, so today I feel better. So making relations. So two relations, there must be two. So last night you are sleeping, in the morning you are getting up. These two persons, is it different? No different. And then if there is no separate, there is no different person, and how you say making relation? So can you make relation right now with yourself? Or my computer is related to itself. So one is no relation. Relation means two. So the two, the one that you can show, today I am, and the relating to the yesterday, so that yesterday is no longer existing. And how you relate the past of that, or the image of that, you have to bring it up and make relations. So therefore, the relation is not intrinsic. So I think this is very, very essential for seeking liberations and finding the perfect kind of refuge object. If you don't, if you're not able to refute, logically refuting intrinsic natures, and then it's really kind of, there's no convincing, convincingly finding the perfect refuge object.
I didn't quite understand why that's essential for finding a refuge object. Can you make that more clear, please?
So, like I quote this, Right Sitting Sutras, Bhikshu, whoever sees dependent rising sees the Dharma. Who sees the Dharma sees the Buddha. So it means you are so convinced that you are not intrinsically exist, dependently arising. So this dependent rising further kind of leading you to open the possibility of end of the afflictions, end of the second existence. With that, and you have found so convincing there is a Shakyamuni and a noble being, the Arhat, who has ended this second existence. So then you have genuine faith, and so convincingly genuine faith in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. So if you're not so convincingly, and you can rely on the culture and this kind of culturally, what someone else has imposes on you, and with that you just find a way to bring comfort to yourself. So Nagarjuna's in the chapter 18, this is Shen means, many times people are living and finding the comfort that is borrowed from others. So someone else has to inform you, and that really kind of gives you the, to create comfort zone. So if someone proved that is wrong, or then you have to find, very, very nervously, very kind of hesitant. You have to find what else you want to say. So you go to another person, and then that person will project something, and you find, this is how I am. So the identity of yourself is always borrowed. So, what is that peace? So there says nothing that you have borrowed, nothing that you have, it is not regurgitating your teachers, your and the books and the intellectuals. So that, so something that is total pacification of all mental construct. And that peace is the sustainable, reliable. I think it's, otherwise people, this is how conventionally, ordinarily, in the finding the comfort zone that this is why people think that they have to fight, right? So different idea we have to fight because one has to be, supported for me to live. So so the Four Noble Truths, path of accumulations, path of preparations, path of seeing, path of meditation, no more linings. So this is not, there is no any kind of, the, how say, is in the path to the liberation is not about trying to establish or construct some idea. So if you are finding the peace, seeking the peace by constructing some kind of identity, so that is you are kind of finding the peace in fabrications. So the Buddha's teaching is, the peace by pacifying the mental construct or the fabrications. So follower, but still human being is always, we have to fight something. Like, so pure Buddhist teachings, and by following, and then we fight, this is Sotantika school, this is Vivashika school, this is Mayamurna school. And then if there's nothing, you will have no obvious kind of different concept and say, you're Gilu, Yingma, and Kaiju, right? So Theravada and Mahayanas. So we always try to find for yourself to be more comfortable in kind of idea. So then for that, you think others is more kind of, obstacles for your idea. So Bhikshu, whoever sees the dependent rising, sees the Dharma. Whoever sees the Dharma, sees the Buddha. So the peace here is through pacifying the mental construct. Pacifying the mental construct that includes, things arises by itself, things arises from other, things arises from both, things arises with no cause. So I think the way the Buddha is laying the reasoning to constitute the dependent rising or absence of intrinsic existence. And then Baba Vivek kind of, his thinking, so how the Buddha Palita is mistaken to proving, things lacking intrinsic existence. So there are so confusions. So this becomes big debate. So, and it's also very, very important. So any other questions? Okay.
Chanju Simja Rinpoche, Majebana, Jejuji, Jebanyamba, Mevaya, Kone Kondo Pebblish, Tony Tawa Rinpoche, Majebana, Jejuji, Jebanyamba, Mevaya, Kone Kondo Pebblish, Pama Simjan Tamje, Dada Denjuji, and Rotamje Tata Tona, Chanju Simba Kana Sushu, Dada Kunja, Molam Juju, Karera Bego Vishi Lazo, Pendan de Wama Juve, Jerezo, Tinzin Jazu, Shabe, Sede Badu, Denjuji.
May the precious Bodhi mind not yet born arise and grow. May the born have no decline but increase forevermore. May the precious mind realizing emptiness not yet born arise and grow. May the born have no decline but increase forevermore. Through all these merits, may all father and mother sentient beings have all the happiness, and may all the lower realms be empty forever. Wherever there are Bodhisattvas, may all their prayers be accomplished immediately. In the sacred land surrounded by snow mountains, you are the source of all benefit and happiness. O powerful transcendental counsel, renaming this world into samsara ends.
Thank you very much.